Good morning, everyone. It's fantastic that so many of you have joined us here this morning for our conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can advance gender equality in climate action. We have an exciting agenda, beginning with Brianna Fruin, a climate activist from Samoa, and Little Amal, a puppet, both joining today to demonstrate the critical role of young women and girls in tackling climate change. You will then hear a few remarks from our COP President Alok Sharma and get some discussion from our panelists. In the first of these, ministers and leaders will announce their work to advance gender equality in climate action. And in the second, the Honourable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, we will host a courageous conversation between leading frontline and international figures to share their experiences and priorities. And in the final panel, we will hear from civil society, funding bodies and non-state actors on their new announcements and initiatives. And now, to begin, I will hand over to two young women who have travelled a very long way to be here.
Talofa lava. My name is Brianna Fruin, and it is my absolute pleasure to stand by and stand with Little Amal today. Before we share with you all today, we'd like to share something with each other. I brought Amal a say, which is a flower like the one I have in my ear, to represent hope and light, and it is my pleasure to gift it to her. Amal has also brought a gift for me and for us. Both of us have embarked here on a journey. We have arrived here at COP from two very different places, but we are connected by the fact that we are living in a broken world that has systemically marginalized women and girls, especially women and girls from vulnerable communities. While discussing the system and change here at COP, we must remember that gender-differentiated impacts of the climate crisis. Remember the fact that it is our women and girls that feel the brunt of this climate emergency that further amplifies the already existing societal inequalities. But that's why we're here today, well, why we're supposed to be here today, to work and to fight so that all little girls inherit the world that they deserve, to lay the foundation for change to grow. Amal brought with her today seeds. Seeds to physically share, seeds to inspire, seeds to represent hope. The beautiful thing about seeds is that you need to be selfless enough to be content in the fact that you may not eat the fruit or bear the flowers of these seeds you have planted, but feel it was worth it, knowing that your children will live with its beauty. The inspirational thing about seeds is that those who planted them must always have hope that they may flourish, hope that these small gems of possibility may grow into abundance and feed the collective village. The enlightening thing about seeds is that they teach us that the work continues after planting. Our seeds must be tended to, watered, pruned, fed, and checked on. I hope that these seeds Amal has journeyed here with today can inspire you all and remind you the importance of your role as planters of a global future. Remind you to plant the solutions, targets, and hard limits that can help remedy this broken world. To plant hope that will turn into justice, to plant seeds that will grow into change. But most importantly, I hope you remember that these seeds will not grow without work, that the real work will happen outside of COP. As we put words into action, as we cut our emissions, water our renewables, feed our resilience, and shine sunlight on our collective mission for climate justice. The seed Amal has presented today represents all girls who could not be here on this stage, young girls who are counting on you, who are counting on us. They are counting on us to put in the work. Girls who deserve more, who deserve better from this world. This is what Amal represents. This is what her seeds represent. May these seeds be a reminder of the work to come. It is my absolute honor to stand by the beautiful Amal. And I hope you can all stand with us and commit to being planters of real seeds today that may turn into flowers tomorrow. I will hand these seeds out when our ministers are ready, but I hope that within these negotiations, that within these rooms, you may be able to plant them, and then once we leave COP, we may all tend to them so that they grow into a beautiful world that is deserving of girls like Amal and deserving to have all girls be safe within it. Thank you very much.
Many, many thanks indeed, little Amal. We are so proud that you are here with us to share this incredibly powerful message. And thank you, Brianna, for sharing the words that you remind us all that the girls, our daughters now and those in the future, are the ones who will plant the seeds, be selfless in helping them to grow, and indeed make sure that girls of the future continue to look after our planet, as we know that too many of them do without the support or the care or the protection that they need. And it's our job as we go forward to make sure that the questions of gender and climate action are absolutely firmly rooted in the little girls of the future. Thank you. If I may, I'll now invite the COP President, Alok Sharma, to join us.
Good morning, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all, particularly little Amal and Brianna. And thank you, Brianna, for such a powerful speech, setting out very clearly why at this conference and beyond we need to take action. And also thank you for your amazing speech at the World Leaders Summit last week as well. I think delivered in front of world leaders that I hope made them understand why we need to take action on gender. But of course, friends, today's Gender Day cuts across all the work that we're doing here in Glasgow, because gender and climate are profoundly intertwined. And we know that in the impact of climate change affects women and girls disproportionately. And we know from our efforts to tackle climate change that it is more effective when we put women and girls at the heart of those efforts. Now, in my time as COP President, I've had the opportunity of meeting women's groups, girls driving climate action around the world, who I think, in Brianna's words, are not drowning, but they're fighting. They're fighting for themselves, they're fighting for their communities. And I recently had the privilege to speak to some Malagasy women who are living through what some have called the first climate-induced drought in southern Madagascar. And they told me that women are empowering each other to survive. But we also spoke about the damaging impact of climate change and how that can impact gender equality. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to speak alongside Malala, and you will know that her foundation, the Malala Fund, estimates that at least 4 million girls won't complete their education due to climate-related crises. And that is just this year. Just this year. Frankly, that is an absolute travesty. And it's a dangerous one because, as well as being a fundamental good in itself, education empowers girls and equips them to deal with climate, to deal with the effects of climate change and to take climate action. So equality cannot be a casualty of climate. And that means we need deeds, not words. We need action on gender cutting across our work to reduce emissions, to protect communities and build resilience. So we must empower women and girls and support them to create the change. And we have a framework. We need to have one going further as well, but we have one, the Gender Action Plan, which was agreed in Madrid back in 2019. But what we actually need is for every single country to implement this plan that was put together and to be guided by the UN Women-convened Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition, which was launched earlier this year. And I'm very pleased to say that today, new initiatives from the UK government are going to advance these efforts. So firstly, on finance. We are committed to using our climate finance to empower women and girls to amplify their voices and address their needs. So today I can announce that UK support for our £120 million Bangladesh Climate and Environment Programme will be set out, and this will support women's leadership, their access to finance, education and skills, all the while tackling climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. You'll also be aware that yesterday the UK government announced over £270 million to help communities across Asia and the Pacific better plan, invest in and fund climate action. And today, I'm pleased to announce that £45 million of that funding will be invested in the Community Resilience Partnership Programme, supporting local communities and grassroots women's groups to adapt to climate change whilst challenging gender inequalities. And I'm also pleased to note that the UK funding to the Women Delegates Fund has supported six delegates to attend COP26, because ultimately we are committed to women's participation at every level and through all our work. And that is why we are hosting Gender Day today. Now, over the next few hours, we will hear further ambitious commitments that support women and girls to take action on climate, that center them in adaptation, that advance gender in finance, and that support participation in the UNFCCC. And I'm very grateful to everyone stepping up with commitments. And I hope that together we generate that momentum that builds in force and impact across this vital decade for our climate. So let's work together, friends, to create a world where women and girls are at the heart of all our climate action decisions. Thank you.
Alok, thank you for your kind remarks. I'm very proud of the commitments that the UK has made today, and thank you for ensuring that this COP has put gender at the very heart of all our discussions. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we will turn to a video intervention from Julienne Baseke, coordinator of the Association des Femmes des Médias, a network of women journalists based in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is the first of today's 3 video submissions, part of the Equality Fund's September 2021 Dialogue on Feminist Climate Action, an initiative amplifying the voices of feminists in the Global South.
Le changement climatique dans notre communauté locale s'est traduit par une perturbation des saisons. Les femmes représentent la main-d'œuvre agricole ici, et l'agriculture, c'est l'activité traditionnelle de femmes. Ça veut dire que les femmes doivent travailler, doivent cultiver pour faire vivre leur famille, pour nourrir leur famille, pour scolariser leurs enfants. Et du coup, il y a perturbation de la saison culturelle. La femme est consciente du fait que le changement climatique affecte différemment les hommes et les femmes. Et cela influe sur le rapport de genre ainsi que sur le statut social et des hommes et de femmes. AFEM, à travers sa radio d'équité du genre, qui est Mama Radio, elle produit des programmes, de magazines, de spots, d'éducation pour sensibiliser les femmes sur la question du changement climatique. Nous recommandons comme stratégie idéale la reforestation, le reboisement et également l'agriculture. Promouvoir l'agriculture en impliquant la femme. Et comme les femmes constituent la frange de la population qui est plus responsable de la cuisson, donc qui utilise beaucoup le charbon et le bois de chauffe, nous pensons que renforcer les capacités de femmes sur les énergies renouvelables serait vraiment une des solutions efficaces.
We will now begin the ministerial panel. We will be hearing from ministers and leaders from 8 countries, each coming forward with commitments demonstrating the importance of gender equality as a critical part of climate action. These commitments and the initiatives that follow will have a real and positive impact on the lives of women and girls around the world. A reminder, if I may, to my speakers, a maximum of 3 minutes, if that's possible. And we'll start, if we may, from Bolivia, with the Executive Director of the Plurinational Authority of Mother Earth, Angelica Ponce.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Quiero saludar a cada uno de ustedes que están en esta sala. Mi nombre es Angélica Ponce, soy la ejecutiva nacional de la Confederación Sindical de Mujeres Interculturales de Bolivia, pero también autoridad plurinacional de la Madre Tierra. En mi país, el compromiso ha surgido hace muchos años de encaminar juntos en un mundo diferente, un país que reconoce más de 36 nacionalidades, lenguas y culturas del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia. En este mismo caminar hoy ya siendo parte del gobierno, nuestro compromiso y por supuesto nuestro reclamo es seguir caminando porque nos falta mucho todavía profundizar la igualdad y la equidad de género también como en otros países. Nosotros como mujeres queremos ser parte de los espacios de poder político y por supuesto los espacios de poder de decisión a nivel nacional e internacional. En esta lucha de la justicia climática, nosotras las mujeres indígenas fuimos quienes vivimos día a día la cruda realidad del cambio climático dentro de nuestros territorios. Somos las que sembramos, las que cosechamos y las que abastecemos la canasta familiar en diferentes sectores, por ejemplo en Bolivia. Hermanos y hermanas, el gran compromiso como gobiernos desarrollados deberían tener una mirada más al pueblo, más a los países subdesarrollados en la ayuda correspondiente, en los fondos de cooperación de la justicia climática que debería llegar a los lugares más marginados y vulnerables, como también países en desarrollo como Bolivia. Nosotros como bolivianas, como mujeres bolivianas, fuimos las más afectadas con un golpe de Estado y además el cambio climático dentro de nuestros hogares nos ha reflexionado profundamente de que debemos empezar a contribuir cada una de nosotras, de las familias, en cuidar nuestras plantas medicinales, que también son muy importantes, porque nuestros antepasados, nuestros hermanos, nuestros abuelos, nuestros abuelas, antes no había medicamento académico, sino más bien plantas medicinales, y hoy por hoy hemos aprendido a recuperar también esto. Nosotros como mujeres tenemos un solo sentimiento, todas las mujeres del mundo. Somos mujeres dadoras de vida, guardadoras de semillas, que movemos sentimientos, sensibilidad en la humanidad. Y nuestro gran compromiso como mujeres debe ser la lucha de manera conjunta y hermanada, haciendo alianzas de que el mundo también escuche y piense de la manera que nosotras pensamos las mujeres. Las mujeres somos sensibles. Hoy podemos reconocer, el mundo pensado desde el hombre ha destruido también, ha destruido muchas cosas. Y realmente hoy quisiera decir yo como mujer indígena y autoridad de Bolivia, que también el mundo debería pensarse desde el pensamiento de la mujer, desde el sentimiento de la mujer. ¿Cómo sería un mundo pensado de la mujer? Terminaría con la violencia, terminaría con la violación, infanticidio y feminicidio. Pienso que sería la solución muy importante de tomar a las mujeres en los espacios de poder de manera igualitaria y equitativa. Me dirijo ante el mundo entero. Sé que muchas mujeres estarían felices de estar en estos espacios, pero es un poco difícil acceder a estos lugares donde se deciden por todo un mundo, y realmente mi gran deseo sería de que por lo menos para los años siguientes nosotros como pueblos indígenas y como autoridades podamos acceder a los espacios más de toma de decisiones, poder decidir. Lamentablemente los países subdesarrollados todavía no hemos podido llegar a alcanzar la justicia o por lo menos los compromisos de los países desarrollados en este tema del cambio climático, las ayudas directas a nuestros pueblos indígenas y no así con intermediarios. Muchas gracias. Quiero pedirles a cada una de ustedes, hermanas, de que no estamos solas, todas somos una, seamos del campo o seamos de la ciudad. Somos seres humanos, somos mujeres que sentimos por nuestros hijos, por nuestras hijas, y además sentimos por las generaciones que vienen detrás de nosotras. Hoy las mujeres también desafiamos, ¿no?, de tener decisiones como mujeres desde el sentimiento, desde la vivencia, como mujer, como madre, como dadora de vida. Queremos pensar un mundo mejor, un futuro mejor, pensado desde la mujer, con sentimiento, convivencia, y como mujer indígena que siembra y que guarda la semilla, quiero decirles al mundo entero de que demos la oportunidad a las mujeres también en los diferentes espacios de poder, no solamente en el Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia, sino también en todo el mundo. Hay muchas mujeres que quisiéramos estar en estos espacios de poder hacer alianzas de lucha, y realmente hoy veo muchas mujeres en esta sala que están comprometidas de llevar esa semilla desde este lugar y ir a sembrar a nuestras casas, poder generar los compromisos como países y como mujeres para poder desarrollar la transformación de vida diferente, sensible, con respeto y con igualdad. Tener los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y de las mujeres de la ciudad sean los mismos y no sean ahora como ahora. El mundo es diferenciado, el mundo es diferente. Muchos estamos en espacios más altos y otros estamos olvidados, y no queremos eso. Queremos ser iguales porque tenemos los mismos derechos y somos también humanos. Muchas gracias, hermanas. Un kayaya, que la Pacha los bendiga, y un saludo especial a nuestro hermano Sharman. Cuando vino a Bolivia, fui quien la recibió con los brazos abiertos para poder hacer conocer también mi país. Y estoy muy agradecida de estar acá juntamente también en este espacio, de poder ver este gran desarrollo y los compromisos de gobiernos que se vayan cumpliendo y no solo queden en papeles y en acuerdos, sino que se cumplan, hermanas. Un kayaya. Muchas gracias.
Angelica, thank you for that impassioned intervention. Women are the keepers of life. If we all take that home with us, I think we will be making great progress. Monica, if I may, Monica Medina, the US Assistant Secretary, and if I may ask you to try and stick to 3 minutes, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, delegates, friends, and excellencies. First, let me thank Alex Sharma and the UK Presidency and the entire team for leading such an important event. And I also want to acknowledge the tireless work of one of our fellow speakers here today, our Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. It's an honor. I just want to say what an honor it is to be here on the heels of passing the bipartisan infrastructure legislation in our country that she engineered. It's a once-in-a-generation investment in our country to turn this climate crisis into an opportunity. So I want to thank her for her leadership and the leadership that it will allow us to have at home and abroad. As I look around this room and the millions of women and girls leading this movement, I see an incredible group of environmental defenders. We're using our voices to call for the changes we need, protecting our communities and nature, and leading the innovations of the future. But even as we take action, women and girls are so often the ones bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. I heard just yesterday from 2 remarkable female leaders from Uganda and Nigeria. They spoke about how climate impacts in their communities mean that too many women are losing their traditional livelihoods, struggling to provide food for themselves and their families, and facing increased risks of violence and conflict. This is a topic of critical importance here at COP26, but one that has too often been sidelined from the discussion in these halls. But these intersections and the disproportionate impacts of climate change can no longer be ignored. My friend and Executive Director of the White House Gender Policy Council, Jen Klein, recently said climate change is not gender neutral, and my friend Samantha Power, our USAID Administrator, put it even more pointedly: climate change is sexist. Women and girls, especially those who are members of marginalized populations, are on the front lines of this crisis. Climate-related disasters hinder access to essential services, including sexual and reproductive health care. Women are less likely to have emergency savings compared to men, and women can often be the ones left behind in dangerous situations following disasters. So let me skip ahead to the programs that the U.S. has brought forth at this incredible COP. Let me just list a few. First, we have our national strategy on gender equity and equality, which has dedicated an entire chapter to women. We've also launched a new Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund with at least $14 million to be invested in gender-responsive climate programming on women and girls, participation in the green economy, and resilience to climate shocks. Our USAID is scaling up its Advanced Gender in the Environment Initiative in partnership with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to provide tailored support to countries to develop climate change gender action plans. It's fitting that today is also Science and Innovation Day here at COP because women are also leading the way in the scientific field. Our USAID is partnering with NASA to make a $3 million investment in Surveyor, a program that will build opportunities for women in the sciences and translate that innovation into resilience for women farmers on the ground. And my colleagues at the State Department are putting forward more than $5 million towards a range of gender and climate programs. So in closing, I just want to emphasize that the climate future is female. Why? I think it is because we deliver life. We are mothers, we are daughters, we are sisters, wives, and grandmothers and girlfriends, and our connection to this issue is primal. For me, it began with my daughter who had severe asthma as a young girl, and I watched her struggle on a breathing machine for just the very air to breathe. And it continues with my mother, who is a passionate advocate for elephants, and it reminds me every day that we must protect nature. We as women are connected. We are at the forefront of this crisis, and we're at the forefront of the solutions. Why? Because that's what women have always done. They've protected their communities, the nature surrounding them, and used their voices to call for the changes we need, and then figured out how to do it. Thank you all, and let's get to work.
Thank you, Monica. Indeed, I think the climate future is indeed female, and thank you to the US for your enormous commitments and that you're very much back at the forefront of helping us to solve this challenge. If I may, I'll turn now to our Swedish colleague, the Minister for International Development Cooperation, Per Rosenfrith.
Thank you, Minister. Indeed, a pleasure and an honor to be here. We've had 1.5 years of COVID-19, a time of backsliding, hard-won gains for human rights, gender equality, democracy are being rolled back as we speak, as we meet. The inequality setback is clearly the result of an incomplete analysis of the needs of a society in crisis. And on top of this, we have the climate crisis. Worldwide, women have less access than men to voice and power and resources such as land, credit, agricultural inputs, decision-making structures, technology training, extension services that would enhance their capacity to adapt to climate change. Now, women are not the polluters of this world, yet they carry the consequences of climate change on their shoulders. Women represent the majority of the world's poor, are proportionally more dependent on threatened natural resources for their livelihood, and this is true particularly in rural areas where women shoulder the major responsibility for household water supply and energy, for cooking, heating, as well as for food security. 1 in 3 girls does not have access to clean water and often lack facilities for menstrual hygiene. Without a gender perspective, we risk to miss out on long-term sustainable solutions. We miss out on invaluable knowledge needed for a sustainable green transition. So we need to include women in all types of decision makers. Now, I represent a feminist government, and Sweden conducts a feminist foreign policy. This means that me and my colleagues need to ensure in every decision we make that women and girls should have the same rights, same duties, the same possibilities as men and boys. A sustainable planet, sustainable peace, security and development cannot be achieved if half of the world's population are excluded. Now, Minister, in 2019, Sweden adopted a climate policy action plan, which states that a gender perspective is to permeate all climate action. Climate action should be based on the different prerequisites and equal possibilities of rights of women and girls, as well as men and boys. Gender equality has been systematically mainstreamed into Sweden's development cooperation, and Sweden has spearheaded efforts to adopt ambitious gender policies, not least in the multilateral climate funds. In 2020, the Swedish government assigned the Swedish Environment Protection Agency to integrate a gender perspective in all their core operations. The agency has also developed a proposal for national strategy to integrate a gender perspective in the implementation of the Paris Agreement in Sweden, and this plan is now currently processed by the government. Now, the transition to low-carbon development and climate change adaptation is a major transformative endeavor requiring the participation of all countries, all communities, and people of all gender. Gender-equal societies are less likely to end up in conflict. Women's equal rights and opportunities are essential not only for achieving justice and equality, but also for economic development, for sustainability. A feminist approach and an ambitious climate efforts are not only issues of rights, it's simply the only smart thing to do. And Sweden is ready to continue to lead on climate action, to continue to lead on gender equality, not as two different things, but two mutually reinforcing sides of the same thing, and that thing being our common future. With that, allow me to thank you, Minister, for convening this important meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for showing the way, and I think Sweden's gender equality throughout all policy is a beacon for many, many others to try and follow. So thank you for your leadership on that. If I may now turn to Nigeria, we have with us Mr. Musa Hassan, who is the Permanent Secretary and Deputy Minister for Nigeria. Mr. Hassan.
Thank you very much for this invitation, Honourable Minister, and all delegates available. Nigeria faces various environmental challenges which are climate change induced, such as erosion, flooding, landslides, etc. These problems in turn have an adverse effect on livelihoods within the communities, especially our farmers, women and children. However, the direct impact of these challenges has already put a lot of women in serious problems. In implementing the Paris Agreement and Nigeria's national determined contributions, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at the Conference of Parties COP23 adopted a gender action plan which would be integrated into parties' climate promises in the Paris Agreement. For a more holistic action plan, it is important that Nigeria has a unified voice on gender and climate change issues. In domesticating the Gender Action Plan, a national action plan on gender and climate change was developed. The goal of the action plan is to ensure that national climate change processes in Nigeria mainstream gender considerations to guarantee inclusiveness of all required. The document will serve as a guide into climate change and challenges to women. The need to mainstream climate change into national action plans and action cannot be overemphasized, though the priority sectors covered in action plan were selected according to Nigerian national determined contribution, the economic recovery and growth plan. In July 2016, the Federal Minister of Environment, through the Department of Climate Change, commenced the process of developing the Gender Action Plan by organizing stakeholders consultative workshop. A draft national action plan was developed as an output. Further consultations were done, and subsequently Nigeria was able to develop her own action plan on gender. I have it here. What is now required is action. We need more support, more technical support and financial support, but Nigeria is just on the right track because we also have other agencies that are directly responsible for women affairs. We have Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, we have Women Development Centers, we have other areas also that have direct, even our Constitution has a direct effect on the issues and challenges of women and children. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed. You're quite right. And the hashtag for today is Act on the Gap. I think that's exactly the message that you bring so strongly to these discussions. Thank you very much indeed. If I may now turn to Canada and the Ambassador for the Environment, Patricia Fuller. Patricia.
Merci, Madame Ministre. En tant qu'ambassadrice du Canada pour les changements climatiques, je suis honorée d'être présente à cette discussion très importante. Canada is fully committed to advancing gender equality in climate action, not only because women are more impacted by climate change, but also because climate action cannot be effective without the full participation of women. In Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, partners who have worked with us over the past 5 years know well that Canada has placed gender equality at the center of all of our development projects. So this has meant in projects that range from, for example, advancing the leadership of women in water security projects in the Peruvian Andes with the application of indigenous knowledge, to advancing the participation of women negotiators in the UNFCCC process. So I'm pleased to announce today that as part of the doubling of Canada's climate finance pledge to $5.3 billion over 5 years, that Canada will apply the target of 80% for projects that will target gender equality outcomes and ensure gender-sensitive decision-making. So this means, for example, that when we are working with organizations, we will be looking to see what is the participation of women in the decision-making processes, what is the participation in the boards of companies that are involved in our climate finance projects, and how are women involved in the supply chains that are relevant to climate action. I'm also pleased to say that Canada will join the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition and advocate for the integration of gender considerations in domestic and international climate policy. And I'm also pleased to note that we're actively engaged in supporting the adoption, or the implementation rather, of the Gender Action Plan of the UNFCCC. And just a few weeks ago, we presented a formal submission to the UNFCCC highlighting the gender-differentiated impacts of climate change and the role of women as agents of change in Canada. Donc, j'espère qu'en faisant la promotion des engagements et des mesures qui favorisent l'équité des sexes dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques, nous apporterons une réponse mondiale à ce fléau climatique qui sera réellement inclusive. So, to conclude, we need all involved, because if we are to win the fight against climate change, we need to have women participating equally in climate action. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Patricia, thank you, and thank you for Canada's commitment that 80% of your projects will have gender equality outcomes as a necessity. That is a huge leap and something that I think all countries should consider. That's the sort of way that quietly and effectively we can shift the dial here. Thank you. If I may, I'll turn to Ecuador and the Undersecretary of Climate Change, Ms. Karina Barrera. Karina.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alok Sharma, distinguished panelists, and everybody, good morning. I want to start my speech saying there are different ways to look at women's role in climate action. Some will see us vulnerable actors or victims of the effects of climate change. But today, I want to highlight the importance of women as agents of change to transform the territories, enterprises, and to increase the climatic ambition. We are the power that haven't been enough enabled. I just want to switch to Spanish now. En Ecuador hemos trabajado de una fuerte manera en crear un marco de gobernanza que pueda anclar nuestra ambición climática a través de nuestra NDC. Hemos trabajado en incluir nuestra ambición en transporte, energía, agricultura, cambio y uso de suelo como nuestros ejes centrales. Pero en este ejercicio encontramos información valiosa sobre cuál es nuestro estado frente a la acción climática. Hemos encontrado que uno de los sectores más importantes es cómo está funcionando nuestro sistema financiero, cómo llegan los créditos, especialmente a los sectores rurales, cómo se distribuyen estos créditos. Las mujeres contribuyen con el 50% a los ahorros de la economía popular y solidaria, pero solamente reciben el 30% de los créditos que llegan a ellos. Por asuntos como quién tiene la propiedad de la tierra, qué tipo de educación tengo, o la falta de capacidad para elaborar proyectos propios. Estas son las desigualdades que no permiten habilitar la acción climática. Con estos indicadores estamos desarrollando el Plan de Acción de Género de Cambio Climático en Ecuador. Estos indicadores nos permiten también incorporar una serie de herramientas en los diferentes proyectos, pero también nos llama la atención a todos los actores públicos, privados y a un sistema financiero que aún no regresa a mirar la acción climática como una prioridad. We think that climate action must involve all the actors, private sector, financial sectors, public sector, but everyone has to build together a new policy that includes women. We think that a main issue is how the money comes to the territories, how the financial model comes from the business or international model to local models and to the territories. We have to think about that. We think to be more inclusive, to distribute correctly the funds and the resources, different kind of resources. I think that climate action must be engaged, must be enhanced with the action of the communities, indigenous communities, and all people in an integrated way. Thank you.
Karina, thank you so much indeed. Now, if I may turn to Germany, we have with us the Director General in the Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety, Dr. Christian Paulus. Christian.
Dear Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan, distinguished ministers, delegates and friends, thank you very much for the invitation to this important event. And I would like to extend warm greetings from Federal Minister Svenja Schulze, to whom the nexus of gender and climate is of utmost importance. At COP25 in Madrid in 2019, the enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and the Gender Action Plan were adopted. Now we, the parties, are to focus on implementation. The Gender Action Plan affirms that it is critical that all climate stakeholders, public and private, respond to and implement gender-related activities. And this is where our new German ICI gender strategy comes in. The International Climate Initiative is the most important financial instrument of the German Environment Ministry to support financially international climate and biodiversity action with the Global South. Since 2008, ICI has supported over 750 climate and biodiversity projects in more than 60 countries with an overall budget of 4.5 billion euro. And I'm very pleased to announce today that going forward, the ICI has decided to mainstream the integration of gender perspective and the promotion of gender justice as an action guiding principle and cross-cutting theme to the whole program. This refers equally to both the ICI project cycle and to its institutional processes and procedures. In order to realize this, the ICI Gender Strategy has been developed and is officially published today on our ICI website. The goal of the ICI Gender Strategy is to promote gender transformative approaches in international climate and biodiversity cooperation. Therefore, all projects should integrate concrete measures to reduce gender-based discrimination and inequalities. Targeted considerations of gender aspects will contribute to more effective climate and biodiversity projects. To break down the ICI Gender Strategy and to formulate concrete measurable targets for the next year, an ICI Gender Action Plan is currently being developed. With this, the ICI does its part to actively anchor the guiding principle of gender justice into this funding program, as it is also demanded by our ministry's gender strategy. And I'm glad to share this important German contribution to the implementation of the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan with you today. What does it all encompass? The ICI Gender Strategy will specifically contribute to the following objectives of the UNFCCC GAP. First, improving gender mainstreaming and plans and strategies. Second, involving all genders in the process of developing, implementing, and updating climate policies, plans, strategies, and actions at all levels. Third, increasing the availability of disaggregated data. The linkages between the climate and biodiversity crisis are becoming more visible each day. And this is why I very much welcome the fact that also the Convention on Biological Diversity will also have its own gender plan of action. As climate and biodiversity are in the heart of our ICI projects, it is great to see that both UNFCCC and CBD consider gender such an important aspect. Thank you very much for your attention. Moreover, thank you for your commitment. Together we are sending an important signal about the importance of gender in the context of climate change.
Dr. Paulus, thank you very much indeed. Mainstreaming gender justice across our programming is a really strong signal, and thank you for leading on that. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to ask the Maldives to close this panel as one of the existing co-leads of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition. I will turn to their Special Envoy to Climate Change, Mrs. Sabra Noordeem, to tell us about her country's journey to becoming a co-lead of this Action Coalition, which we have heard many countries are joining today. Over to you, Sabra.
Thank you, Minister. Excellency, distinguished delegates, good morning. I'd like to begin by welcoming and commending the initiatives made by those that spoke before me. In addition to improving gender equality in your own countries, I hope the success of your work will allow many others to adopt similar programs. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the Maldives, who chose to co-lead Feminist Action for Climate Justice within the Generation Equality Forum, along with Costa Rica in consortium with the Latin American Faculty of Social Science and the National Institute for Women. In the Maldives, just as in many other countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately impacted women's livelihoods, care burden, and mental health. Similarly, with respect to climate change, those who suffer most are those who have always suffered the most: the poor, the marginalized, and in particular, women and girls in rural areas. In some, add in the climate crisis, and all of the day-to-day challenges intensify tenfold. Women and girls play a leading role in advocacy for climate justice in the Maldives. Much of this stems from the fact that the climate emergency presents an existential crisis for the Maldives and our way of life. The impact of global heating is not an abstract scenario, but one that already directly impacts women on our islands, making a living growing crops which are now more frequently destroyed by severe storms, or the family that runs a guest house who has to spend more per year to place sandbags on the shore for protection against encroaching waves. These voices are integral in our efforts to conserve the resources vital to our livelihoods. With the right kind of facilitation, we have seen the successful transition of many of these advocacy efforts to progressive policy.
An achievement we are very proud of is our newly amended Decentralization Act, which ensures that women make up 1/3 of the newly elected local councils. This is a guaranteed 384 out of 982 seats. I'm happy to say that 388 women councillors were elected this year. Along with greater financial independence and an increase in budget for the councils, the number of women now in leadership and policy roles, especially at a local government level, is both encouraging and exciting. We've also implemented other structural policies, such as increasing paid maternity leave to 6 months, paid paternity leave to 1 month, and appointing women justices to the Supreme Court for the first time. The translation of women's experiences and views into policy is central to climate-just solutions. Our gender equality plan, which is in the process of being finalized, sees the mainstreaming of gender equality measures throughout government, including increasing the number of women in leadership positions in local government by 45% by 2025, in the judiciary by 15%, and providing services such as daycare, initiating gender-responsive budgeting, and revising our national data systems to include disaggregation of data by sex and age. We have a lot more work to do, but we want to do it because we know that having more women at the table means the questions that are asked, the discussions that take place, and the decisions that are taken are a truer reflection of our society and our needs. Investing in gender equality is paramount to progressive climate action. From caregivers, surf instructors, marine biologists, resort managers, and ministers, we have seen a greater focus on climate-just solutions with the increase of women in these leadership roles. It is both an ambitious mitigation and adaptation measure. But all of this is dependent on the ambition agreed to here this week. We need to halve emissions by 2030 to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. We have only 98 months to do this. I thank you.
Barbara, thank you very much indeed, and I think all those of us in this room who are female politicians at any level send our heartiest congratulations and good luck to those 388 new female councillors. That's really exciting, and for all of you that aren't yet taking up a political baton, I recommend that you try it. Sometimes it's challenging, but as the lady I'm about to introduce knows, it's also extremely fulfilling and it genuinely makes a difference. So may I thank all of my wonderful panelists this morning, to those of you who've already made commitments earlier this year at the launch of the Feminist Action of Climate Justice Action Coalition. These commitments signal a significant step forwards in our work to tackle climate change and gender equality, but collectively there is much more for us all still to do. So I call on all other countries represented in this room or not here today to become commitment makers under the Feminist Action for Climate Justice. So for our next session, chaired by the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, we will welcome to the stage women who have led climate action in a variety of contexts to share their thoughts and experiences. But before then, we'll have another video submission, this time from the Equality Fund's Dialogue on Feminist Climate Action.
Mi nombre es Angélica Cheneroc y yo soy coordinadora de Agua y Vida, Mujeres, Derechos y Ambiente. Nosotras somos uma organização ecofeminista que trabalha conjuntamente com mulheres indígenas, campesinas e urbanas marginadas em el estado sureño de Chiapas. Desde há mais de 20 anos, as mulheres campesinas já não sabem quando sembrar o maíz e outros cultivos, porque já não sabemos quando vai chover. Tampouco sabemos em que quantidade e em que frequência virem as chuvas. Aqui em Chiapas, tanto as organizações das mulheres como os movimentos feministas hemos estado visibilizando esta situação e os impactos diferenciados do câmbio climático em la vida das mulheres, em especial das mulheres empobrecidas e racializadas. Em estes 26 anos, hemos visto que as decisões basadas em acordos políticos que não chegam ao fundo do problema, que é o sistema econômico capitalista, patriarcal e colonial, a temperatura do planeta seguirá aumentando e ameaçando todas as formas de vida. Nós, como mulheres, abogamos por um câmbio real, por soluções concretas, efectivas, desde lo local, orientadas hacia el cuidado de todas las formas de vida del planeta, que solo tenemos un planeta, que es nuestra responsabilidad cuidarlo, protegerlo y defenderlo, y que otra economía basada en la vida, basada en el cuidado de la tierra, sí es posible, si realmente existe el compromiso y la valentía política de cambiar el sistema.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite another vocal advocate for gender equality, the Honourable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Madam Minister, for leading that beautiful panel today. We came with a great and distinguished delegation from the Congress of the United States. We came to listen, we came to learn, and what we heard gives us great hope. It is a privilege to be here with the congressional delegation to join you today as we act upon the climate crisis, the existential threat of our time. It's a thriller multiplier, a threat multiplier, amplifying and accelerating existing inequities in our economies and societies. 80% of people displaced in climate change globally are women. Addressing the rapidly changing climate is a matter of justice and equality with the most vulnerable, most affected, including indigenous communities, less developed countries, and our focus today and every day on women. To that end, we come here fresh from advancing the most ambitious and consequential climate and clean energy legislation of all time in our country. I acknowledge and now I want to recognize our distinguished delegation, if they would all rise, the largest delegation to ever attend such a meeting. We're so proud of them. Thank you all. Again, we learned, we've gained hope listening this morning and being reported to in the course of the past week. But we're here today to report on what we have done. This is a nearly $1 trillion investment in Build Back Better and bipartisan infrastructure framework, recognizes the interconnectedness of climate change and gender justice, and enables women and girls to lead a just transition to a clean energy economy of the future. Our legislation advances our mission to decarbonize and realign every sector of the economy. It is a model of collaboration that brings together public, private, and nonprofit sectors to scale the solutions necessary for achieving net zero pollution globally. These bills are far-reaching in scale and scope, ensuring that the design, manufacturing, financing, and deployment of our future economy is cleaner and greener. That means hundreds of billions of dollars for clean energy tax credits, resilience, environmental justice, and state, local, regional-led climate solutions where women play a key role. It also is an investment in our care economy, child care, family and medical leave. It's about home health care. It's about universal pre-K, all of the things that liberate women to play a more important role in our economy. All of this advances President Biden's plan to cut climate pollution in half by 2030 and net zero by 2050, as he and Special Envoy John Kerry have presented already here, and we're very proud of our leadership on this subject. I'm proud that this legislation's commitment to tackling climate change for the world and for women, and by the end of this year we will pass legislation toward doubling our international climate finance commitments. Chairman Meeks is here to talk about that later today. We are also proud of our chair of the Select Committee on Climate Crisis, Kathy Castor, for launching the most ambitious climate action plan in American history. It's Build Back Better with Women. Build Back Better with Women. I want to also recognize the great women members of our delegation so that you know that in making these decisions that women have a seat at the head of the table. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Betty McCollum, Shelley Pingree, Suzanne Bonamici, Julia Brownlee, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Veronica Escobar. Now, people ask me all the time for many years, if you ruled the world, what one thing would you do? If I ruled the world, the one thing that I would do is invest in the education of women and girls and their empowerment. You and I know that makes all the difference in the world, not just to their women, those women, to their families, to the communities, to their countries, to the world. So I thank you for the opportunity, Madam Minister, thank you, and the President as well, to participate in this timely conversation. Thank you for recognizing the centrality of women in the climate fight. And thank you to the women and young women people who have been mobilizing. We always say in Congress, inside maneuvering can just go so far. The outside mobilization makes everything better. And so let's thank those young people for their mobilization and women as well. And they're true to our mantra, we don't agonize, we organize. We organize. So let's thank them for what they're doing out there. Again, because we believe that when women succeed, the world succeeds. And so, as President Biden has said, America is back. Together for the planet, for the women, for our children. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning. And now it is my privilege to introduce First Minister Nicola Sturgeon of Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed, Speaker Pelosi, for that inspiring address to us. And let me issue a very warm welcome to you and to the entire congressional delegation from the United States to Glasgow. You're very welcome here, and we look forward to you being part of our discussions over the next few days. When women succeed, the world succeeds. Speaker Pelosi's words there, I think, are an inspiring introduction into this next part of our Gender Day discussions. It is my great pleasure to be chairing this panel. There is no doubt we must ensure that climate change is a feminist issue. We must make sure that the experiences of women and girls across the world, so often disproportionately impacted by climate change, are understood as we devise the solutions. And we must make sure that the voices of women are at the centre of creating and implementing the solutions to climate change. So this is an opportunity to discuss some of that. I was very proud to launch last week, in partnership with UN Women, the Glasgow Women's Leadership Statement, which has already attracted support from governments, businesses and civic organisations across the world. My thanks also go to those governments who have just announced commitments under the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, and to those from civil society who will follow our discussion. And I'm delighted to join them in announcing today that Scotland will become a commitment maker, focusing on capacity building and resilience, access to finance and supporting women and girls to lead a just transition. So these are important times, and this is, of course, an important discussion. Let me therefore introduce this fantastic panel that I have the privilege to chair today. Fatou Dieng is the founder of Clean Earth Gambia, the Women and Gender Lead for Youngo, an Achieving Scholar at Sussex University. Tarsila Riveri Zia is a Quechuan activist from Peru who has dedicated her life to defending and promoting the rights of indigenous people and cultures. And Asa Regner is Deputy Executive Director at UN Women and a former Minister for Gender Equality in Sweden. So please give them a warm welcome here today. I want to kick off this discussion by posing to all three of our panel members today this question, asking them to give their views on what the top priorities are for us all to better tackle the nexus between gender and climate. And I will address that question first of all to Asa. Welcome.
Thank you so much, First Minister, and thank you for organizing this. And Fatou and Tarsila, thank you. It's lovely to be here with you. Speaker Pelosi, thank you for your introduction. Very impressive. Also, thank you to those of you, First Minister, who mentioned the Action Coalition on Climate Change and Gender Equality. From UN Women's side, which I represent, we have seen throughout the years in the 80 countries where we have programs and where we target and work together with the poorest women, how much climate change really affects their lives in reality. This can be in the Pacific, this can be in Latin America, and also in the Amazon. It can be in the Sahel, obviously, where women fight the effects of climate change in armed conflict or in farmer-herder conflicts, in agriculture, food security, in their daily lives. But they also claim, and they have the right to be decision makers, and their claims and demands have the right to be heard. So that's why UN Women, together with member states, the private sector and experts, took the initiative to something called the Generation Equality, to close the gap between the gender inequalities in the world and the reality that we see. And the Action Coalition on Climate Justice is one example, one initiative to gather those who want to change the world in terms of gender justice, gender equality, and the effects of climate change. So thank you everybody for engaging in that. I also wanted to say, to finish this round, that I think that having been a politician myself and a cabinet member in my home country, Sweden, I do see, obviously, that politicians need to be held accountable, and it's very, very urgent that that happens. And they have to involve women and girls. We know that when women have the power, politics and policies actually do change towards more of legislation, solid legislation, and more resource allocation towards climate change. We also know that with more girls in schools, as Speaker Pelosi mentioned, we can actually see that the more access girls have to education, climate policies are more prioritized in those countries. I also see, however, from my own experience, that there can sometimes within the same cabinet or administration be far between the ministries of, let's say, social affairs, gender equality or women's issues, to foreign policy, and the ministries of environment. And I think that these governments, these gatherings, these meetings like the COP, the Action Coalitions, and those spaces are important to gather everybody, and most of all to meet with civil society and activists who live the reality. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think both very important points about the need for more women in decision-making roles, but also to understand better the linkages and relationships between different areas of policy. Tarsila, would you care to address that question? What are the priorities to better understand these links between gender and climate?
Muchísimas gracias por mencionar a los pueblos indígenas, las mujeres indígenas, y muchísimas gracias por tener la oportunidad de tener la voz y la palabra. En el mundo somos alrededor de 480 millones la población indígena y las mujeres indígenas llegamos alrededor de 240 millones en las 7 regiones geoculturales del mundo. Esto quiere decir que no se queda ninguna región sin la voz de las mujeres indígenas. Y como se ha escuchado también, la prioridad pasa a ser el derecho a la participación, el derecho a ser consideradas como sujetas de derecho con voz propia y con aportes. Como ustedes pueden comprobar alrededor del mundo, las mujeres indígenas decimos que somos cuidadoras de semillas y por lo tanto cuidadoras de la futura generación en sus alimentos y su salud. En ese sentido, la prioridad, por ejemplo, cuando se escuchó que se va a relacionar cambio climático con el convenio de la diversidad biológica, perfectamente nos incluye a las mujeres indígenas, porque no se discute un aspecto allá y acá, sino que hay que mirar la integralidad de los aspectos que rigen la vida de las mujeres indígenas. Sí es cierto que somos las más afectadas, sin haber sido responsables, pero también es necesario mirar que las violencias en el mundo contra las niñas y las mujeres indígenas tienen que desaparecer, tienen que erradicarse. Uno de los aspectos que también lo vemos como violencia es justamente el impacto del cambio climático que arriesga la salud, la alimentación, la vida y muchas veces mujeres que pierden tierras, pierden recursos y pierden vidas defendiendo esos derechos. Entonces, la prioridad cuando decimos derecho a la participación, derecho a participar en espacios de decisión tiene que ver con esto, ser escuchadas para construir políticas que nos incluyan, pero que también recojan nuestros aportes. No queremos las mujeres indígenas ser vistas como las personas que necesitan un poquito de ayuda. No, somos las que tenemos aportes y solo necesitamos esto que se está hablando mucho, la inversión, no una donación, un regalo, sino invertir en el desarrollo de capacidades de las mujeres, de las niñas y las jóvenes indígenas, también mirando el marco de la Agenda 2030, porque todo es holístico, todo es integral. Mujeres indígenas que participan y tienen la oportunidad de vivir dignamente, en libertad, en igualdad, porque aquí es cierto, queremos erradicar las desigualdades, más bien, una de ellas la desigualdad de género, aspiramos a la igualdad de género. Y ahí hay que tener en cuenta las interseccionalidades como mujeres indígenas y la cuestión intergeneracional. Nuestras hermanas mayores no se pueden ir a la tumba sin transmitir esos conocimientos maravillosos para, por ejemplo, seguir manteniendo y conociendo los árboles que capturan carbono, los alimentos y las semillas que son resistentes a la semilla. La inversión queremos que no flote por ahí, queremos que llegue y nos fortalezca a todas y todos, porque somos parte de esa sociedad y de esa humanidad que tiene iguales derechos y a eso aspiramos. Muchas gracias, no sé si mis minutos terminaron.
Muy bien, excelente. Thank you so much. You said something there that resonated very strongly. Women are not pleading to be supported, we're demanding to be empowered. I think that is a very good strapline from our discussion. Patti.
Thank you very much. I am very much happy to be in this panel talking about gender equality, gender justice as far as climate change is concerned. Before responding to the question that you've asked, I just want to take us back to what the minister from Sweden mentioned, that women are not the polluters, yet we bear the burdens that are made by the polluters. This doesn't only show the disproportionate impact of climate change on women, but the fact that gender equality still lacks in our climate discussion, still lacks in the implementation of our NDCs and our national climate agenda. And I believe for us to really tackle climate change and to ensure that gender and climate change is a priority, we first need to build the adaptive capacities of women to sort of like respond to climate shocks, as well as to be able to access quality education as well as healthcare services. For instance, I am from a country where it's just over 2 million people, yet when climate change occurs, it is the women that are basically mostly affected. But when it comes to building the capacities of women, it is always lacking. Even though women actually have the indigenous knowledge, we have the local knowledge, but our inclusion and us getting access to certain adaptive capacities for us to be able to really effectively mitigate and adapt to climate change has been a challenge. And for us to really prioritize that, we really need to ensure that it is included. The second thing which my colleagues have mentioned here is the issue of women in leadership. Women need to be included in the decision-making processes, the planning, the monitoring, and the evaluation of the policies that we are going to be making as far as climate change is concerned. Because obviously, as we always say, he who feels it or she who feels it knows it. And you don't expect people that are being affected at the local level, at the grassroots level, not included on the table to talk about the challenges that they are facing, as well as propose recommendations for them to be included. And we have seen this over the years, not only in our annual climate negotiations and our global climate negotiations, but even at the national level in terms of leadership. And for us to really prioritize or tackle the climate crisis, we need to make sure that women are part of the leadership process to ensure that at least we're taking things seriously. And the third thing which I wanted to mention is the issue of building partnership with local women-led initiatives. Because obviously at the national and the grassroots level, we see a lot of women and youth-led organizations working on climate-related issues. But when it comes to them included, it is always a problem. So for us to really sort of like also make sure that we prioritize it, we need to ensure that we are including these women-led initiatives to actually engage them so that we could collectively address the climate crisis. Because this is not an individual fight, obviously. It is a collective fight, and everyone is basically needed on board. So at the local level and at the national level, we need to ensure that we engage women-led initiatives. And when it comes to our national action plans, that is with our implementation of our NDCs, we need to make sure that they are gender sensitive and they are gender responsive. Because women are affected differently from men. And for us to really be able to effectively adapt to the impacts of climate change, we need to ensure that we are sort of like gender sensitive, because it cannot be the same response that we could give because of how we have been seeing the devastating impacts of climate change all over the world. So I believe if these are followed, or these things are basically taken as a priority, we are not only going to be able to act on the gap, but ensure that all the challenges that comes along the way are also being mitigated and also solved. So these are some of the things that I just wanted to share as far as tackling and prioritizing gender and climate change is concerned.
That point about leadership, I think, is fundamental. When world leaders gathered here this time last week, of the 120 or so, a tiny minority were women. That needs to change, and it needs to change quickly. But in the meantime, there is a real job to do to promote understanding and awareness of these interrelationships. The point about climate change creating new inequalities for women, population displacement, is a strong one. But it also exacerbates existing inequalities, violence, food scarcity. I want to pose a question to all three panelists, reflecting on where we are sitting here at a UN conference on Gender Day. That has to represent progress. How hopeful are you, and what are the barriers and the challenges that we now need to work together collectively to overcome? What motivates you to push ahead over this next crucial period to make sure that women's voices are much, much more central to all of these discussions? As I'll hand to you first.
Thank you so much. No, I really do think, I do feel hopeful and optimistic, although I'm also a realist. But as I said, I think that gatherings like this where different people representing different walks of life, NGOs, the UN, the rest of civil society, not only women's organizations, but also member states and experts. That is what we need. I also think in relation to investments that Tarsila spoke about, and so did you, Fatou, I think that it's important for us to remember in these kinds of gatherings that out of the ODA, the International Money for Cooperation, only 3% of the climate ODA is actually targeting specifically women's rights and gender equality. And this is actually something that member states can change and can work with, and I think that the UN, with its convening power, should really address that, because as long as we don't have the resources, little will happen. And those who argue and make this argument most of all, that is women's organizations, youth organizations, and climate activists. And right now we see, and we worry a lot from the UN perspective, and we also do try to do something about it, not only worry, but we do see that although there is this increased interest in making us all meet, and not only meet, but actually take action, there is also more and more repercussions against activists in the world. There is shrinking space and actually less funding for women's organizations and other NGOs. Apart from that, it's also increasingly dangerous, we see. And this has been exacerbated during the COVID pandemic, where COVID restrictions were used against activists to further shrink space. So I think that important for us to keep that optimism going is to, in our daily lives, do whatever we can to use the tools we have, whether it's legislation or resource allocation or convening or dialogue or programs in our case for UN Women, so that the optimism becomes realistic and that we have results in real life.
Thank you.
En mi caso, diría que estos espacios sirven muchísimo para aprender y para hacernos escuchar. Eso es un avance. Lo importante es que las decisiones políticas tienen que ser implementadas en nuestros países. Pedimos a que los decisores de política cumplan con los compromisos internacionales en el plano nacional y local, porque tenemos muchos compromisos, convenios aprobados, y cuando miramos desde la realidad de abajo para arriba, todavía vemos el logro de acceder a derechos plenos, lo vemos como un sueño, una quimera. Y quiero tomar las palabras de la señora Pelosi. Educación y más educación. Hay que invertir en educación para erradicar justamente las desigualdades, dar oportunidad a todas y todos. En el caso de las mujeres indígenas, si tenemos lengua propia, conocimiento propio, territorio propio, cultura y saberes que compartir, no podemos seguir aceptando que el ingreso a la escuela pública sea dejar de ser lo que somos. ¿Por qué? Porque se desconoce la cultura y los aportes de las civilizaciones que estamos en los países que hoy son pluriculturales y multilingües. Entonces, el sistema de las Naciones Unidas, donde estamos ya casi más de 50 años, las organizaciones indígenas, nos ha servido y nos sirve, pero ahora nos falta lograr que todas esas buenas intenciones lleguen a la práctica, en lo local, porque es indispensable erradicar las discriminaciones de todo tipo, eliminar el racismo por las diferencias en las culturas, en las lenguas. Creemos que justamente implementar los compromisos internacionales, teniendo en cuenta a las propias actoras, va a permitir tener programas realistas y realizables. Y el otro aspecto para mí importante es que invertir en erradicar las desigualdades y las exclusiones garantiza la sostenibilidad social, la sostenibilidad económica, y tiene que garantizar la sostenibilidad de nuestra vida, porque todos estamos en un solo mundo, ¿qué es esto? Está el pobre, el rico, el empresario, el político y también nosotros. Compartir esto es lo más importante.
Thank you. And again, Fatou. Thank you very much, First Minister, and my colleagues have really brought in really crucial points as far as gender equality and climate change is concerned. And to respond to this question that I've been asked, I just wanted to share that in my country, which is the Gambia, we have been experiencing the severe impacts of climate change, even though we contribute very little to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And with the impacts of climate change that has basically occurred, it has affected mostly the agricultural sector. Gambia is a country where over 70% of the population engage in agricultural activities to support themselves and their families. And with that population engaged in agriculture, it is women that are dominated in this sector because they use the agricultural proceeds to support themselves and their children to go to school. However, over the past years, we have not seen how climate change has not only affected the agricultural yield, but also affected the level of income. I am a daughter of a farmer, as I've mentioned, and my mom sells vegetables. But climate change has basically affected severely this particular activity that my family has been engaged in. And this is also coupled with the other environmental challenges that we have been facing, which is flooding, which has led to displacement of people, especially women and girls. And we've also experienced sea level rise, we've experienced drought and desertification. I am from Banjul, the Gambia, which is the capital city. It inhabits just over 35,000 people. And scientists have mentioned that if the sea level rises for just 1 meter, the city of the Gambia, which is Banjul, will be inundated. And this is the case for other countries in West Africa. Nigeria has been facing climate-induced conflicts between the farmers and herders. In Sierra Leone, they have been facing severe flooding, which has affected girls and their level of education. And a UN report has mentioned that with the devastating impacts of climate change, it is going to affect mainly the poor and the vulnerable. And out of that, 80% of that constitute women. And according to a recent report by the Malala Fund, the impacts of climate change is going to affect the level of education of girls in low and middle income countries. This is about 4 million people in 2021. And this number is projected to increase to 12.5 million in 2025 if it is not addressed. And this is going to continue as the years go by. We are sitting here in the negotiation rooms making policies about climate crisis. But are we really considering the gender aspect of it? Because the climate change issue is a human rights issue because of how it has been affecting people. At the end of the day, it is our families that are back home who are not in these negotiation rooms to talk about what they are feeling on the ground. We have the opportunity to sit and negotiate about the climate crisis, and I think we really need to consider those people that are left behind, that are facing the daily challenges that they continue to face. And for us to really be able to achieve climate justice, we need to ensure that we're able to achieve gender equality and gender justice, because I believe these two go hand in hand. And if we really want to achieve or get to a fairer planet, we really need to make sure that women and girls are really put at the heart and the center of these discussions that we'll be having today. This is really an emotional issue for me,
because I work with local communities, and every single time I see especially what women and girls go through. Women and girls, especially girls, have been forced into child marriage due to the level of poverty that families are in as a result of the impacts of climate change. Children are forced to stay at home, especially girls, when flooding occurs, because parents are scared that if they allow their girl child to go in that condition, they might lose them. So what I really want us to do here today, or just to go away with, is to ensure that we really prioritize gender equality and gender justice, because we have been talking about it for the past years, but there hasn't been a lot of progress. Even with our NDCs, with the mention of quality, with the mention of education, there hasn't been in-depth detail or information about gender transformative education. And I think we need to really discuss these things, because these are the things that really matter to us and the families that we leave back home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all three inspirational panelists. Unfortunately, we are not just out of time, we are actually over time. So I'm going to have to draw this session to a close, but I thought those words there were incredibly powerful. Climate change is a human rights issue. Gender equality is a human rights issue. The impact of climate on women is a human rights issue, and that is how we must see it. This is about empowerment of women through education, through listening to women's experiences and allowing them to drive the solutions, and seeing more women, of course, in the decision-making roles that are making the decisions and deciding the direction of travel that we take. I hope you have been as inspired as I have by these three fantastic women here today, reminding us of the urgency of this and the importance of putting women's lives at the centre of climate action. So please give a massive thank you and round of applause to Fatou, to Priscilla and to Asa. And we'll now have a final video submission from Sandra Liliana Luna Delgado, who is a member of a feminist movement based in Colombia.
Mi nombre es Sandra Liliana Luna Delgado, yo hago parte de la Ruta Pacífica de las Mujeres. La Ruta es un movimiento de mujeres colombiano, es un movimiento feminista, pacifista, antimilitarista. Para nosotras es importante el cuidado del ambiente en la implementación del acuerdo de paz que hoy tenemos en Colombia. El lenguaje es muy importante. Nosotras hablamos de una crisis climática producida por un sistema que ha beneficiado una mirada sobre el capital, sobre una modelo de desarrollo que busca acaparar, que busca producir, y que en ese modelo de desarrollo se sacrifican aspectos muy importantes que son la vida, la ética, la justicia y el cuidado. Las mujeres y las niñas, ellas no son solo víctimas, sino que han demostrado la capacidad, creatividad e innovación ante la adversidad, tomando la iniciativa y siendo líderes en la generación de transformaciones culturales que paso a paso contribuyen a proteger el medio ambiente, mejorar la calidad de vida de sus hogares y sus comunidades, es decir, ayudan a revertir las inequidades y desigualdades que el sistema patriarcal impone sobre las mujeres y el planeta. Yo creo que hoy es muy importante poder avanzar en estas soluciones para las crisis climáticas con presupuestos sostenibles, con agendas que realmente impacten. Por eso es muy importante que las mujeres que están formadas, que tienen la agenda y las propuestas, estén en los cargos de decisión.
Thank you, and thank you to our last panel for their valuable insights, demonstrating, I think, and calling for that building of capacity for women's empowerment. I take away, women aren't pleading for support. We are demanding investment in our leadership. So now we have the opportunity to hear from our third panel. We're going to reflect on the essential role that civil society and the private sector, entrepreneurs, innovators, and frontline responders play in ensuring that climate action delivers for women and girls. So I'm joined on stage by 4 exceptional women, but first, via a pre-recorded video, Bijal Bramati, Executive Director of the Mahila Housing Trust, will talk about the INSU Resilience Centre for Excellence for Gender Smart Solutions.
Dear Excellencies and valued guests, in my role as the Director of Mahila Housing Seva Trust India and a member of the INSU Resilience Global Partnership Gender Working Group, it is an honor for me to speak to you today. I represent women from the informal sector living in urban slums who are invariably at the receiving end of many deprivations, structural, social, economic, and environmental. Women, especially in developing countries, are at increasingly high risk of suffering losses and damages from climate change. And please note, these are not just economic, but also non-economic in nature. What do gender discriminatory norms and inequalities result in? They create a reinforcing causal loop that continually diminishes women's adaptive capacity. Not only this, it mutes their response to climate stressors. To address this issue, we need global consolidated cooperation of stakeholders from the macro to the micro level. Later today, at an event held at the Canadian Pavilion, the INSU Resilience Centre of Excellence for Gender Smart Solutions will be launched. This INSU Resilience Centre of Excellence aims to fill the knowledge and action gap on gender equitable disaster risk management strategies and will provide guidance to practitioners on innovative solutions. We as Mahila Housing Trust India are fully supporting this initiative. Speaking from experience, I know very well that if women are provided with scientific knowledge and tools to undertake risk assessments, and if equipped with resilient technologies and financial solutions, it leads to an increase in uptake of locally relevant and climate resilient solutions. The sisters we work with are influencing governance, planning, and may I stress that they are ensuring adaptation measures are in place at the household, community, and city levels. Next year, under the framework of the Center of Excellence, we will jointly commission a research together with the INSU Resilience Global Partnership on the poverty-related barriers for access to climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. The Center of Excellence is a community-driven platform supported by the members of the INSU Resilience Global Partnership. This Gender Day provides a new impetus to flourish our collaboration towards a shared vision and common goals for equality and climate justice.
So, first of all, may I introduce the Chief Financial Officer of Community Markets for Conservation, Prudence Mushino-Taha. Prudence will be talking about the work of the rallying cry.
Good afternoon to my fellow female colleagues. Good afternoon to my fellow female colleagues and our male counterparts. My name is Prudence Mushino-Taha. I am an ambassador of the Rallying Cry initiative. I am also the Chief Financial Officer of Community Markets for Conservation, a social enterprise that supports wildlife conservation, small-scale farmers in climate-smart, sustainable agricultural practices in Zambia. And the majority of our farmers are women. Last week, I was in the fields with some of the women farmers. The warmth of the sun was gentle. The scent of rich Zambian soil was strong. Their stories were inspiring. Today I speak to you with the voices of these women ringing in my ears. The women that are not here in this room. They are the ones who understand climate change perhaps better than anyone, because they live it. Ladies and gentlemen, these women are leaders who have the solutions. They engage in conservation agriculture, soil carbon sequestration, and crop diversification. You may not have heard of reapers and the 3 varieties of legumes they are growing, but they know. They know how this improves crop productivity, their incomes, climate resilience, soil fertility, and food security. They are saying to all of us, it is time for global leaders to lead from a deep understanding of the reality on the ground, as we do every day. In this room, we need more voices of leaders who are living climate change. Such leaders aren't always politicians. They are farmers and women like us who hold up half the sky. We grow what you eat while preserving the soil, the natural ecosystems, and the climate for our communities and for our future generations. You want to take climate action that works. So I say to all of us, listen to and learn from our ground level experience, from our wisdom passed through the generations, from our adaptive knowledge, and from our resilience. This is my rallying cry. That is how together we will find the food and climate solutions the world needs. The rallying cry ecosystem is committed to giving African women business leaders a platform to change the world. We help you find the right solutions. The ecosystem catalyzes investment in private sector gender and climate solutions in Africa. Along with the rallying cry team, I am committed to bringing the voices of many rural women on the front lines of climate change to the forefront of global climate debate. What is your commitment to them today? Millions of African women are doing their part to lead and be the change we need. Your part is to listen to them, to invest in them, and to become part of the ecosystem of change. Our planet, our legacy. The time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Prudence. A great rallying cry indeed that there should be a platform for women to change the world. I'm a supporter already. Thank you. Now we'll turn to Jessica Espinosa, who is the chair of the 2X Talents. Jessica.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The 2X Collaborative, who I represent, is a global industry body for gender-lens investing that is convening the entire spectrum of capital providers to move the needle on gender and climate-smart finance. And it is with great pleasure that I can announce the launch of the Gender Smart Finance Guide for investors by the 2X Gender and Climate Finance Task Force, an initiative to leverage the power of gender-smart investments for climate action. The guide, right at this moment, is being officially launched at the dedicated event in the MDB Pavilion by EIB, CDC, and EBRD, the 3 organizations who have powered the initiative. This guide provides extensive guidance, tools, and analysis, as well as relevant case studies to support investors to mainstream gender into their climate finance investments. The guide also includes 11 sector-specific and thematic guidance notes to dive into the why, the what, and the how of gender and climate investing. Why should investors have both a gender and climate lens, covering both the business case and the impact case? We also tackle what these investments look like using case studies that are sourced from the 2X community with real-world investment examples, and how to define these investments under climate finance and the 2X criteria. The guide directly speaks to 4 of the 5 priority areas under the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan. It also answers to all 4 action areas of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice, supporting investors to identify opportunities for gender and climate financing will increase direct access to financing for gender-just climate solutions, in particular for women and girls at grassroots levels. Through the case studies, the guide showcases examples of how gender-smart investments can enable women and girls to lead a just transition to a green economy. By making women part of the solution, it will build the resilience of women and girls to climate impacts, disaster risk, loss, and damage. Helping investors to mainstream gender into climate finance investments will increase the collection and use of data on the gender-environment nexus. Climate change and inequality are the twin challenges of our generation. Climate finance must be mobilized at scale to meet this challenge. The full participation of women as leaders, as employees, entrepreneurs, and consumers is essential for climate finance to be effective and meet the climate crisis at the speed and scale necessary. Thank you.
Jessica, thank you, and for announcing the launch of the Gender Smart Finance Dish. It's exciting. This is the practical stuff that means we can get on and make sure that financing is going to those places in a gender balanced way and empowers all those women and girls and projects that we know can make a difference. So thank you for your commitment. And now, if I may, I'll turn to the co-founder of RISE 2030, Reem Assad. Reem.
Thank you, Minister. Your Excellencies, feminist group, and all distinguished guests. Lebanon's recent financial collapse, beginning in 2019, is a story of how a vision for rebuilding a nation once known as Switzerland of the Middle East was derailed by corruption and mismanagement of funds. Then came the COVID-19 crisis, which further aggravated the situation on all social, economic, and health levels. In the summer of 2020, amidst the pandemic and the economic meltdown, the unimaginable happened. A major blast hit Lebanon's capital, injuring thousands, destroying a large part of the capital, and more than 300,000 people were left homeless. As a result, Lebanon is sinking into one of the most severe crises in the world in the past 150 years. Most companies and industries are failing, mass immigration, mass migration, 80% unemployment rate and poverty rate, and due to the government's inability to fund and maintain the country's infrastructure, Lebanon is currently facing radical shortages in power, water, and gas. RISE 2030, a climate-conscious renewable energy initiative that was born in 2018. At that time, it was before the country's economic and social collapse. And now, instead, it's just become an essential part of the solution. The initiative is managed by Sustain the World and CEFI International. Our organization started lobbying international donors and companies and the government to install renewable energy projects such as waste recycling facilities, wastewater treatment plants, and many solarization projects for gardens, such as gardens. The initiative focused on empowering community members by providing them with education and on-the-job opportunity to find jobs in the sector. We insisted on launching all-women teams in the construction and infrastructure sector, which in Lebanon has less than 1% female representation, and even in the US, less than 10%. Creating all-women teams is a bold statement directed at the construction sector, demanding an increase of employment of women in male-dominated sectors. As you can see, green jobs replaced all jobs in Lebanon. Women were part of the community building green activities as laborers, technicians, engineers, founders, managers. While Lebanon seemed to have hit rock bottom, the situation is even worse for women and refugees. Being a woman in Lebanon has never been harder, yet women are proving to be leaders of change as they take matters into their own hands in order to drive the change they want to see in their own communities. In Lebanon, we did not choose to live sustainably. We were forced to do that in order to survive. The rest of the world still has a choice. Make the right one. Adopt climate-friendly solution before it's too late.
Reem, thank you for what you're doing with RISE 2030. It's really exciting. I think the idea that the construction sector, under these huge strains that Lebanon is suffering, has at its heart now some amazing all-women teams leading the way and leading not only the recovery but the change that needs the long term is really exciting. And I think we can all come and watch and take notice and see if we can challenge our own construction sectors to take women on in the same way. So thank you for what you're doing. All right, turn my microphone off. And last but not least, may I turn to Sophia Swire. Sophia is the co-founder of Gender Equity Diversity Investments. Sophia.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, global citizens. Investing in women is not a charity. It's quite simply the most profitable, most effective way to solve the problems we are all here to address. Female-led businesses are more sustainable. They're more stable. They return more on capital, and they exit faster. In fact, this is the 11th straight year where female-founded companies have exited faster than the broader market. But only a shocking 2.3% of global private equity funding goes to female founders. 2.3%. It's embarrassing. Perhaps then it's not surprising to learn that there are more male fund managers called Dave than there are female fund managers. My name is Sophia Swire, and I'm an impact investor and serial entrepreneur. I'm here to announce our pledge. We're going to raise and invest £100 million or more in female-led businesses that have profitable solutions for people and for planet. The vehicle is JEDI. It's not yet a fund, which is why I can tell you something about it. JEDI is the acronym for Gender Equity Diversity Investments. It's our path to delivering on the Gender Action Plan and the climate resolutions that you all make at this summit. For example, one female founder that we work with uses AI to offset and measure CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. She's supporting us and will support our portfolio companies to reach net zero by 2030. JEDI stands for everything I believe in. My life's mission has been tackling poverty through private sector development, to help people make money and do good. I've learned through experience that to have maximum impact, you have to invest in women. For 30 years, I've delivered education, training, and enterprise for women. Women reinvest in the education, the health and well-being, and the general benefit of their communities. Everyone benefits. And yet, women continue to be over-mentored and underfunded. No amount of advice replaces resources. If the planet is to have a future, we must unlock the potential of all of humanity. And that means accelerating investment towards parity. JEDI has already identified over 600 exciting tech-enabled female-led prospects via our global network. I invite you all to connect through our website, jedi.vc. That's JEDI with a GE. After all, investing in women is the single biggest overlooked investment opportunity on the planet today. At the end of the day, we should all be JEDIs, and the power and the force to build a conscious, regenerative, and inclusive future lies within all of us. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you. I think I've secretly always wanted to be a JEDI. Now I've found a way. This is very exciting. Thank you for what you're doing. Really exciting to hear about the 100 million that you're raising. And I completely agree. Maximum impact. Invest in women. We all know that's true, don't we? Amazing what you're doing. Thank you. As we come towards the end of this session, I'd like to thank again all my wonderful panelists on this one and those before. I hope that both those in the room and those who've been joining us online are as excited and inspired by these examples as I have been. In the past 2 hours, we've seen the conversation shift. Countries are developing plans and strategies to put gender equality at the heart of their national climate action. And women and girls are continuing to change the world. We've advanced the position of gender equality in climate finance flows, and we have advanced agency. Countries have committed to promoting the leadership of women and girls, especially indigenous communities and rural women. And we have learned from organisations working at the local level, empowering women and youth to participate in the energy transition through education and employment. And we have scaled up adaptation, building women and girls' resilience, supporting grassroots women's groups, and enhancing the evidence base on best practice. Game-changing in their own right, these commitments are more than the sum of their parts because they demonstrate that initiatives like the Gender Action Plan and the Feminist Action for Climate Justice will be invaluable as we continue our work to ensure gender equality is a critical part of climate action. And we must continue to learn from each other and share our solutions to tackle these interrelated challenges. In my role as the UK International Champion for Adaptation and Resilience for our COP26 presidency, I have met with so many women and girls who are leading work to combat climate change. Their experiences and priorities are all different, but one message has been the same. The time for gender-responsive implementation is now. So to conclude this event, I would like to invite Her Excellency Dr. Rania Al-Mashat, who is the Minister of International Cooperation for the Arab Republic of Egypt, to join me and reflect on progress made today and prospects for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister Trivlen, and of course to the UK for hosting COP26 and for the very insightful discussion we've had this morning. It's really an honour to join all of you in this very important event on gender equality and climate action. And it's been very inspiring to hear new examples of how to enable gender equality in the climate action. And I think all of us are here today to send a message that, as you just mentioned, time for gender responsiveness implementation is now. We are here at a critical historical moment, and there's urgent need to build momentum within our global community to amplify the voices of women and girls who are at the heart of climate impact. We've heard from all our panelists and discussants today that climate action is not gender neutral, it's not gender blind, and there is a disproportionate impact on women. And here let me underscore some of the points that were highlighted. First, empowerment of women is an important ingredient in building climate resilience. There is strong and mounting evidence at the country level that improving gender equality contributes to policy choices that lead to better environmental governance, whether through increased representation and voice of women within their communities, in society at large, and as we heard from many at a political level, and through increased labor participation. Second, low emissions development pathways can be more effective and more equitable where they are designed using gender-informed approaches. Billions of women around the world make decisions every day that influence the amount of carbon that is released into the atmosphere. Therefore, strengthening women's political representation and leadership roles within the wider society is likely to contribute to the goals we all want to achieve from COP26. Third, the mainstreaming of gender-sensitive approaches is starting to happen across the range of climate actions, but much more needs to be done. And I think this is the call for action for all of us, all stakeholders who have been here today. Gender mainstreaming is urgently needed, both in dedicated climate finance and in approaches to climate-smart official development assistance. We heard from UN Women that ODA for that particular goal is quite small, only 3%, and we need to all work together to push that forward. There are 4 areas that have been identified as critical building blocks in response to climate change: mitigation, adaptation, technology transfer, and financing. On mitigation and adaptation, efforts should systematically and effectively address gender-specific impacts of climate change in the areas of food security, agriculture, fisheries, biodiversity, water, health, peace, and security. And we saw firsthand some of the examples from countries around the world where women have been affected. On financing, mechanisms must be flexible enough to reflect women's priorities and needs. Gender analysis of all budget lines and financial instruments for climate change are needed to ensure gender-sensitive investments and programs for adaptation mitigation, technology transfer, and capacity building. Technological developments related to climate change should take into account women's specific priorities, needs, and roles, and make full use of their knowledge and expertise. In addition, women should also have equal access to training, credit, skills development programs to ensure their full participation in climate change initiatives. And we're very happy for the actors of change here and also the impact investment for women, which I think will make a huge difference. Against the above background, governments should incorporate gender perspectives into their national policies, and we've seen very important examples today as well, and other measures on sustainable development and climate change through carrying out systematic gender analysis and establishing gender-sensitive benchmarks and indicators, and developing practical tools to support increased attention to gender perspectives. The rich discussions we witnessed today by ministers, civil society, business leaders, and activists give us hope. Give us hope through showing the progress towards commitments and policy solutions to achieve the 5-year Gender Action Plan. You all made it clear for us that this is just the beginning of many necessary steps that are needed to strengthen commitments on this agenda in the run-up to COP27. Additionally, strengthen support for developing countries to address gender-related action under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, including in relation to the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan, must be a priority, where all stakeholders have been represented today and made this call. In this regard, I will take a minute to highlight Egypt's recent launch of its National Climate Change Strategy 2050 that took place last week here in Glasgow. The strategy is an integrated and comprehensive document that focuses on the social and economic aspects of climate action. It will enable Egypt to plan and manage climate change on different levels while driving the achievement of the SDG agenda and Egypt's Vision 2030. It also addresses gender considerations and mainstreaming, acknowledging that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and builds on lessons learned through the implementation of the National Strategy for Gender Mainstreaming and Climate Change in Egypt that was launched in 2011. The National Strategy recognizes the diverse roles, needs, and contributions of women, puts at the forefront of national development plans the role of women, and sets out to transform social norms, institutional structures, and national capacity by recognizing inclusion and gender equality as key components of sustainable development. Finally, I would like to thank you all for the valuable contributions. I look forward to welcoming you in the world's green city of Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace, in COP27, where we will all speak one voice for all of humanity for a dedicated climate action. But between now and then, we will all act on the gap. Thank you very much.